Dr. John Harding stared at the obituary, the ink blurring through his tears. His son, Mark, gone, a fentanyl overdose. The words were a brand, searing his soul. His boy, his bright, beautiful boy, reduced to a statistic. Another victim in the opioid epidemic ravaging America. Guilt gnawed at John. He was a doctor, sworn to heal, yet he couldn't save his own son. John threw himself into his work, seeking solace in long hours at the clinic. He treated patients battling addiction, their pain a mirror to his own. He prescribed the standard treatments, methadone, Suboxone, but the success stories were too few, relapses were common. The system felt broken. One day a patient named Sarah told him about Kratom, a plant-based supplement she claimed was easing her withdrawals and cravings. John was skeptical but desperate for answers. He began researching. John cautiously began recommending Kratom to some of his patients, those for whom traditional treatments had failed. He monitored them closely, documenting their progress. The results were astonishing. Patients, once trapped in the throes of addiction, reported reduced cravings, manageable withdrawal symptoms, and a renewed sense of hope. They described it as a lifeline, a tool that finally allowed them to regain control of their lives. Sarah, the patient who had first introduced him to Kratom, was thriving. Her recovery was remarkable. She was back in school, working part-time and repairing her fractured family. She became an advocate for Kratom, sharing her story at town hall meetings and support groups. Her experience, and that of others like her, fueled John's belief in Kratom's potential. John's waiting room, once filled with despair, now buzzed with cautious optimism. He saw families reunited, lives rebuilt. He witnessed firsthand the transformative power of this plant, its ability to offer a second chance. John knew he had stumbled upon something profound, a potential game-changer in the fight against the opioid epidemic, but he also knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. The medical establishment, wedded to pharmaceutical solutions, viewed Kratom with suspicion. John's colleagues, though supportive of his efforts, remained cautious, hesitant to embrace an unproven remedy. They warned him about the lack of large-scale clinical trials, the potential for unknown side effects. John understood their concerns, but he had seen the light in his patients' eyes, the hope that bloomed in their voices. He couldn't turn his back on that. John became a vocal advocate for Kratom, presenting his findings at medical conferences and publishing articles in peer-reviewed journals. He knew he was walking a tightrope, challenging the status quo, but he was determined to bring Kratom into the light, to have it recognized as a legitimate tool for harm reduction. His efforts did not go unnoticed. The media took notice of John's work. He was invited for interviews, his clinic featured in news segments. The story of a grieving father, a doctor who had lost faith in the system and found solace in a controversial plant, resonated with the public. People, desperate for solutions, flocked to his clinic seeking his guidance. John became a beacon of hope, a symbol of resistance against the pharmaceutical industry's stranglehold on pain management and addiction treatment. However, not everyone welcomed John's message. Pharmaceutical companies, threatened by a natural, inexpensive alternative to their highly profitable opioid-based drugs, began a subtle campaign to discredit Kratom. They funded studies highlighting potential risks, amplified isolated cases of abuse, and lobbied politicians to restrict access. John found himself facing an enemy with deep pockets and a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Undeterred, John doubled down on his efforts. He knew that knowledge was power. He collaborated with researchers to conduct rigorous scientific studies on Kratom's efficacy and safety. He worked with legal experts to challenge attempts to schedule Kratom as a controlled substance, arguing that such a move would criminalize a plant that was helping thousands. The battle lines were drawn, pitting a lone doctor and his growing band of supporters against a powerful and ruthless industry. John started receiving veiled threats, anonymous calls questioning his credentials, and attempts to discredit his research. He was accused of profiting from Kratom sales, of endangering his patients. The smear campaign was subtle but effective, sowing seeds of doubt in the minds of the public and policymakers. Then came the FDA. Citing concerns about safety and a lack of FDA-approved uses, the agency announced its intention to classify Kratom as a Schedule I substance, effectively banning it. This sent shockwaves through the Kratom community. John knew that if the FDA succeeded, it would have devastating consequences. John refused to be silenced. He rallied his patients, fellow doctors and scientists who saw the potential of Kratom. They formed coalitions, organized protests, and launched media campaigns to counter the misinformation being spread by the pharmaceutical industry and amplified by a complicit media. The fight for Kratom had become a fight for the soul of healthcare, a struggle against corporate greed and government overreach. The pressure was relentless. John's clinic was subjected to surprise inspections. His medical license was threatened. He was constantly followed by private investigators, his every move scrutinized. The stress took a toll on his health, his family, his life. Yet he pressed on, fueled by the stories of recovery, the faces of those who had been given a second chance by Kratom. The pharmaceutical giant Pharmco emerged as the driving force behind the anti-Kratom crusade. Their blockbuster opioid painkiller, Oxy Plus, was facing declining sales as awareness of its addictive nature grew. Kratom, with its potential to alleviate pain and aid in opioid withdrawal, represented a direct threat to their bottom line. Pharmco poured millions into lobbying efforts, funding biased research, and supporting political action committees that pushed for Kratom's ban. They even went so far as to develop their own patented synthetic version of Kratom, hoping to control the market if the natural plant was banned. John knew he couldn't fight Pharmco on their own terms. They had money, power, and influence. He had to fight smarter, leverage the growing public support for Kratom. He began working with advocacy groups, organizing town hall meetings, and speaking at rallies. He shared his story, the stories of his patients, and the science that supported Kratom's potential. John's message, raw and heartfelt, resonated. People were tired of being pawns in the pharmaceutical industry's game. They were fed up with the government's inaction in the face of the opioid epidemic. Kratom offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to reclaim their health and their lives. The movement gained momentum, fueled by grassroots activism and the growing realization that they were not alone in their fight. John found himself at the heart of a growing movement. He connected with scientists researching Kratom's medicinal properties, lawyers battling for its legal status, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by the plant. They formed a formidable alliance, united by a common goal to ensure access to this potentially life-saving plant. He tirelessly traveled the country, speaking at rallies, university symposiums, and legislative hearings. He met with policymakers, educating them about the science behind Kratom and the real-life experiences of those who benefited from its use. He challenged the FDA's narrative, exposing the flawed studies and industry influence behind their push for a ban. The fight was emotionally and physically draining. John faced constant opposition, personal attacks, and even threats. He knew he was risking his career, his reputation, even his safety. But the faces of his patients, the letters from people he had never met who credited Kratom with saving their lives, fueled his resolve. The movement gained momentum, attracting media attention and garnering support from unexpected quarters. Veterans groups, frustrated with the inadequacy of traditional treatments for PTSD and chronic pain, rallied behind Kratom. Families devastated by the opioid epidemic, who had lost loved ones to overdoses or seen them trapped in a cycle of addiction, saw Kratom as a beacon of hope. The battle culminated in a landmark court case, Dr. John Harding versus the Food and Drug Administration. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as John, flanked by his legal team and a phalanx of supporters, faced the government's lawyers. The judge, a respected jurist known for his independence, listened intently as both sides presented their arguments. John's lawyers argued that the FDA's attempt to ban Kratom was unconstitutional, an overreach of their authority. They presented expert witnesses, scientists, doctors, and people in recovery who testified to Kratom's safety and efficacy. They exposed the flaws in the FDA's reasoning, highlighting the agency's reliance on incomplete data and industry-funded studies. The FDA's lawyers countered that Kratom posed a public health risk, citing anecdotal reports of addiction and adverse effects. They argued that the agency had a responsibility to protect the public from potentially dangerous substances, even if those substances were naturally occurring. They painted a picture of Kratom as a gateway drug, a dangerous alternative to proven medical treatments. The courtroom became a battleground for the future of Kratom, a microcosm of the larger struggle between corporate interest and public health, between individual liberty and government control. The weight of the moment was not lost on John. He knew that the outcome of this case would have far-reaching consequences, not just for him, but for millions of people who relied on Kratom for their well-being. After weeks of intense litigation and public scrutiny, the judge issued his ruling. In a stunning victory for Kratom advocates, he sided with Dr. Harding, declaring the FDA's attempt to ban the plant unlawful. He ruled that the agency had overstepped its authority and failed to present sufficient evidence to justify a ban. The courtroom erupted in cheers, tears of relief streaming down the faces of Kratom supporters. The victory was not absolute. The judge acknowledged the need for regulation, urging Congress to pass legislation ensuring the safety and quality of Kratom products. He also called for further research into Kratom's potential benefits and risks, urging the medical community to approach the plant with an open mind. The ruling sent shockwaves through the nation. It was a major setback for the FDA and the pharmaceutical industry, a testament to the power of grassroots activism and the growing public awareness surrounding alternative health solutions. Kratom, once relegated to the shadows, had emerged into the light, its potential finally recognized. For John, the victory was bittersweet. He had poured his heart and soul into the fight, sacrificing his time, his career, and his peace of mind. He had faced down powerful adversaries and endured relentless attacks, but the fight was far from over. Despite the legal victory, John knew that the struggle for Kratom's acceptance was far from over. The pharmaceutical industry, with its vast resources and influence, would not concede defeat easily. They would continue to fund research aimed at discrediting Kratom, lobby for stricter regulations, and develop their own synthetic alternatives. The FDA, though dealt a blow, would likely appeal the ruling, continuing its crusade to control Kratom. And in the halls of Congress, the battle for comprehensive science-based Kratom legislation was just beginning. John, despite the toll the fight had taken, remained undeterred. He knew that the movement he had helped build was stronger than ever. People from all walks of life, scientists, doctors, lawyers, activists, and ordinary citizens, had joined the fight, united by a common belief in the power of Kratom and the right to access natural, plant-based solutions. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but John, fueled by the stories of hope and healing, the faces of those he had helped, and the memory of his son, was prepared to continue the fight. He knew that the future of Kratom and the well-being of millions who depended on it rested on his shoulders, and he refused to let them down.